On the trade war between China and the United States, I think it is the consensus view that Trump and America is right and that China is wrong. And what is interesting is that China hasn't folded yet under this sort of shock and awe of tariffs from President Trump. And I think it's worth thinking about, why is that the case? Is China just being stubborn, or is there some aspect of the Chinese position that is perhaps not so well understood in the West? And I think it's probably a little bit of the latter, because when China looks at the relationship between herself and the United States, the Chinese view is that China is running a deficit with the United States, not a surplus. So how does China get to this position? Well, they get to this position because they agree with President Trump that China runs a surplus in traded goods. But of course, that ignores the trade in services. And when it comes to services, Chinese companies aren't very good and American companies are very good. And actually, the surplus that America runs on services almost offsets the deficit they run with China in goods. And then when you add the third leg to the stool, and that is the profitability of American companies operating in China domestically, nothing to do with trade, accountancy firms or asset managers or banks or Kentucky Fried Chicken, people like that, compared to the profitability of Chinese companies operating in America, well, there are very few Chinese companies operating in America, let alone profitably. The profitability of American companies operating in China is about $200 billion a year. So when China adds all that up, they actually think they're running a deficit with the United States. And that means, of course, that China has some very large sticks with which to fight back against President Trump. And I don't think that position is very well understood in Washington, and I don't think it's very well understood globally. So it is interesting that China hasn't folded yet, and it may well be that President Trump has gone one step too far and needs to roll back. And of course, the other thing that the Chinese are incredibly aware of is that in China, there is no political cycle. President Trump has got 15 months to sort this out before he faces re-election. So time is very much on China's side. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out, but I think it's going to play out very differently to the way that many in Washington expect.